The ghost town didn't mourn. It hungered. Frozen wind cut through the abandoned buildings like a knife, stirring dust devils that danced over weathered boards and broken glass. At the forgotten crossroads where dead-end trails met, a young woman lay crumpled against a hitching post, her breath forming weak clouds in the bitter cold, her once fine dress now torn and stained with her own blood. Her name was Eliza Thorne, and by any reasonable measure, she should have been dead already. But something fierce and unyielding in her refused to surrender. Her delicate fingers, blue from cold, still clutched the locket her mother had pressed into her palm before their journey west. Inside, a faded portrait and 3 strands of hair, all that remained of the family she'd lost to fever 2 weeks. Into their wagon train's journey, she tried to whisper her father's favorite psalm about walking through the valley of shadow, but her cracked lips formed only fragments, the words scattered by the merciless wind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Just hours earlier, she'd been seated beside the wagon master's son as they led the rear of the caravan. James Harker had been kind to her after her family died. Too kind, the others whispered. A woman traveling alone wasn't decent, they said. When the widow Carson offered to take Eliza in as help with her 5 children, it seemed a blessing. But the widow watched Eliza with hawk-like suspicion whenever James approached, and the whispers grew louder. Unnatural, the widow called her one evening, a girl with no proper mourning and those strange eyes. Eliza's eyes, one blue, one green, had always marked her as different back east. Out here, difference became dangerous. When supplies ran low and tensions mounted, the missing medical kit was discovered beneath Eliza's bedroll. She hadn't put it there, would never have stolen what might save a life. But the wagon master's face had gone hard as granite when his son tried to defend her. "Theft from a wagon train is death out here," he'd said. But they wouldn't soil their hands with her blood. Instead, they'd leave judgment to the elements. They'd dropped her at the abandoned mining town as the first snow began to fall. "An empty town for an empty soul," the widow had said with cold satisfaction. They'd left her 1 blanket and a day's water, no weapon, no fire starter, not even the dignity of a quick bullet. Just the promise that they'd tell anyone who asked that she'd chosen to stay behind, lured by ghost stories of hidden gold. Time blurred as the temperature dropped. Night had fallen hours ago, bringing with it a bone-deep cold that first burned, then numbed. She no longer felt her feet or hands. The world had narrowed to the weak lamplight she'd managed to kindle from the last of her matches and a half-empty bottle of medicinal alcohol she'd found in an abandoned saloon. The flame wouldn't last through the night, and neither would she. "Please," she whispered to whatever spirits might listen, "I don't want to die alone." Her words hung in the frigid air, crystallizing like delicate frost. And then, hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, approaching through the darkness beyond her feeble circle of light. Not the hurried rhythm of a cavalry patrol or the eager pace of returning settlers. This was something else, something cautious, watching. Through the veil of gently falling snow, a figure emerged on horseback, tall, wrapped in furs, face shadowed. Beneath a wide-brimmed hat adorned with a single eagle feather, not a white man's hat, not a white man's stillness. The rider stopped at the edge of her dying light, observing her with unnerving silence. Eliza tried to straighten, to show some final dignity to whoever had come to witness her last moments, but her body betrayed her. She slumped against the post. "Are you Death, then?" she asked, her voice a broken whisper. "I thought you'd be wearing black." For a long moment only the soft nickering of the horse answered her. Then the rider dismounted in a single fluid motion. Up close, she could see him better. A Lakota warrior, his long hair braided with small tokens, his face weathered by sun and wind, eyes sharp as obsidian, not young but not old. a man who had seen enough winters to know caution, marked by scars, that spoke of battles survived. He approached slowly, one hand visible, the other near the knife at his belt. His moccasins made no sound on the snow-dusted ground. Eliza felt no fear. She was already dying after all. What more could be done to her? "The whites left you," he said, his English accented but clear. Not a question, but an observation. She managed a weak nod. "They think I'm a thief." Her laugh turned into a cough that tasted of copper. "Apparently even thieves deserve last rites, though. Did they send you to make sure I died properly, Christian?" Something flickered across his stoic features. Surprise, perhaps, or the ghost of amusement. Without answering, he knelt beside her, reaching slowly toward her face. She flinched instinctively, and he paused, his hands suspended between them. Then, with unexpected gentleness, he brushed snow from her hair, his fingertips barely grazing her temple. "Your spirit fights," he said simply, "but your body fails." "Story of my life," she murmured, darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. He studied her face for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dying lamplight. Then he stood, returning to his horse and retrieving something from his saddlebag. When he knelt beside her again, he held a small hide flask. He removed the stopper and offered it to her. "Drink," she hesitated. "Is it poison?" This time the flicker across his face was definitely amusement. "If I wanted you dead, I would not waste good medicine." With trembling hands, she accepted the flask and took a cautious sip. The liquid burned down her throat, spreading warmth through her chest. It tasted of herbs and honey, bitter yet soothing. "More," he instructed, and she complied, each swallow bringing a spark of life back to her frozen limbs. While she drank, he moved with swift efficiency, gathering wood from the dilapidated buildings surrounding the crossroads. Soon, a small fire bloomed between them, its heat achingly welcome. He wrapped her in an additional fur from his horse. Buffalo, she realized, the thick pelt still carrying the musky scent of the plains. "Why?" she managed to ask as feeling painfully returned to her extremities. "Why help me?" He fed another piece of wood to the growing fire before answering. "My people say when you find a wounded bird in your path, it is not there by accident." He looked at her directly then, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "The grandfather spirit has many ways of speaking, sometimes through a storm, sometimes through a stranger. I'm no message from any god," she said bitterly, "just a girl no one wanted around." He shrugged, the gesture somehow both dismissive and profound. "That is not for you to decide." As the fire's warmth penetrated her frozen body, exhaustion overtook her. Her eyes grew heavy, her thoughts scattered. The last thing she remembered was the Lakota warrior's quiet, steady presence across the flames, and his voice low and rhythmic, singing something in his own language, a prayer perhaps, or a story. Then darkness claimed her. She dreamed of wolves running through snow, of eagle wings spreading against a limitless sky, and of her mother's hands braiding her hair on Sunday mornings. When consciousness returned, it wasn't to the bitter cold of the ghost town Crossroads, but to the soft crackle of a fire and the smell of something cooking. Her eyes opened to unfamiliar surroundings, walls of hide and wood, a small fire pit. At the center, with a pot suspended above, smoke rising to escape through an opening in the ceiling. A lodge of some kind, simply furnished but neat. Furs and blankets formed the bed where she lay. Her torn dress had been replaced with a long buckskin shirt and leggings. Her wounds had been cleaned and dressed with something that smelled of pine and sage. Eliza tried to sit up, but her body protested with sharp pains. A soft grunt escaped her lips. The hide covering the entrance lifted, and the Lakota warrior ducked inside, bringing with him a blast of cold air and a few scattered snowflakes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, older than she'd first. In thought, perhaps 40 winters, with deep lines around his eyes and mouth. He carried a bundle of wood in one arm, a string of small game in the other. He nodded once when he saw she was awake, setting down his burdens before approaching. Without speaking, he pressed a weathered hand to her forehead, checking for fever. His touch was impersonal, clinical, yet not unkind. "The wagon train," she said, her voice hoarse. "Did you see them?" "Gone west," he replied, moving to the fire. "To add wood." 2 days ago? 2 days. She'd been unconscious for 2 days. "Where am I?" "My winter camp." He gestured around the lodge. 3 days' ride from where I found you." Eliza absorbed this information slowly, her mind still foggy. "And you are." He straightened, meeting her gaze with those penetrating dark eyes. "Akacheta." He touched his chest. "It means fighter." "Eliza Thorne," she offered in return, then added with bitter irony, "It means God's promise, though he seems to have forgotten that part." Akacheta made a sound that might have been amusement, turning his attention to the rabbits he'd caught. With practiced efficiency, he began to skin and clean them. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, watching his methodical movements. He worked, in silence for several moments, before answering. "Winter comes. Spirits walked with you at the crossroads. It was not your time to join the ancestors." "You can't know that," she said softly. His hands paused in their work. "I know what I know." "Simple, certain." She tried again. "I mean no offense, but your people and mine aren't exactly friendly these days. Why risk helping a white woman?" Akacheta resumed his task, his knife flashing in the firelight. "I do not help a white woman. I help a human being left to die." He glanced at her. "And my people and yours have never been friendly. The difference is that now, yours no longer pretend." The truth of his words stung, but she couldn't deny them. She shifted uncomfortably under the furs. "What will you do with me?" "First you will eat, then you will heal." He dropped pieces of meat into the simmering pot. "After that," he shrugged, "the path will show itself." Eliza watched him work, this stranger who had saved her life for reasons she couldn't fathom. Everything about him was foreign to her, his movements, his speech, the very way he occupied space. Yet something in his presence brought a strange calm. Here was someone who did what needed doing without drama or expectation. "Thank you," she said finally, "for not leaving me there." Akacheta didn't look up from his work. Thanks are not needed. For what is right? Later, he helped her sit up and offered a wooden bowl filled with rich stew. The first spoonful nearly made her weep. How long had it been since she'd had warm food? The wagon train's supplies had dwindled to hardtack and jerky in the final days before her banishment. As she ate, she took stock of her situation. She was alone in a Lakota winter camp with a warrior she didn't know, miles from any white settlement in the dead of winter. By all measures, she should be terrified. Yet fear felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. She had survived abandonment and exposure against all odds. Whatever came next couldn't be worse than what she'd already endured. "Your eyes," Akacheta said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "One sky, one forest." Self-consciously, Eliza lowered her gaze. Her mismatched eyes had always drawn unwanted attention. "My father called it a mark of destiny," she said quietly. "My mother said it was God's mistake." "Not mistake," he countered. "Power. Among my people, such marks are signs of special sight, the ability to see what others cannot." She looked up, surprised. "Among my people, it's considered a flaw, unsettling. Your people fear what they do not understand." he said simply, adding another log to the fire. They left you to die because you were different. They left me because they thought I stole from them, she corrected. Akecheta's expression remained impassive. And if you had looked like them, spoken like them, worshipped like them, would they have believed you guilty so easily? The question hung in the air between them, uncomfortable in its accuracy. Eliza had no answer that didn't confirm. His point. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the lodge like a living thing. Snow hissed against the hide walls. Akecheta glanced toward the entrance. Storm comes again, he observed. We stay here 3, maybe 4 days before moving. Moving where? She asked. South, to the sheltered valley where my people winter. He studied her face. You are not prisoner. When you are strong enough, I will take you to the fort if that is your wish. The fort. Fort Laramie, she presumed, the nearest military outpost. What awaited her there? No family, no connections, no means of support. A young woman alone at a frontier fort had few respectable options. The alternatives didn't bear thinking about. And if that isn't my wish? The question surprised even her. Akecheta tilted his head slightly, considering her words. Then you must find your own path, but first you must live. He nodded toward her half-finished bowl. Eat. Strength returns 1 spoonful at a time. That night, as the storm raged outside and the fire burned low within the lodge, Eliza lay awake, beneath the warm furs. Akecheta slept across the fire pit, his breathing deep and even, seemingly undisturbed by the howling wind or the presence of a stranger in his dwelling. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened slightly, making him look younger. She studied the lodge interior, details emerging in the dying firelight. A shield decorated with feathers and symbols she didn't recognize. A bow and quiver of arrows, hanging from one of the supporting poles. Small pouches of what she assumed were medicines or sacred objects. Everything neat, purposeful, without excess. This man lived with intention, she realized. Nothing wasted, nothing without meaning. So different from the chaos and waste of the wagon train, where even as supplies dwindled, people hoarded and hid, their share from others. Outside, something moved past the lodge, an animal perhaps, seeking shelter from the storm. Akecheta's eyes opened instantly, alert and focused. He listened for a moment, then relaxed when no further sounds came. Sleep, he said quietly, noticing her watching him. Tomorrow, you begin to heal. How can you be sure? She whispered. His eyes reflected the ember's glow. Because you must. Simple, as if survival were merely a decision to be made, a path to be chosen. Perhaps, Eliza thought as exhaustion finally pulled her toward sleep. For him it was exactly that. And perhaps, if she were brave enough, it could be that way for her too. Morning came with unforgiving clarity. Sunlight filtered through the smoke hole of the lodge, illuminating dust motes dancing in its beam. Eliza woke to the scent of pine, and something unfamiliar, a tea brewing over the rekindled fire. Akecheta sat cross-legged beside it, grinding something in a small stone mortar. His movements were precise, almost meditative, his focus absolute. For several minutes, she simply watched him work, reluctant to break the peaceful silence. His hands, she noticed, were a contradiction, powerful enough to break bone, yet moving with the delicate precision of an artist. He added the ground mixture to the steaming pot, stirring it 3 times clockwise before setting the wooden spoon. Aside, "You're awake," he said without looking up. "Good, medicine is ready." Eliza pushed herself to a sitting position, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. The events of the previous days rushed back. The accusations, the abandonment, the ghostly Crossroads. She examined her hands, still bearing the marks of frostbite, but no longer the angry red of impending death. "What is it?" she asked, eyeing the pot dubiously. "Pine bark, willow, echinacea, wild rose." He dipped a wooden cup into the mixture. "For fever, pain, strength." He offered it to her. Not pleasant, but necessary. She accepted the cup, the warmth. Welcome against her palms. The brew smelled bitter and earthy. Meeting his steady gaze, she took a cautious sip, fighting the urge to grimace as the astringent liquid washed over her tongue. All of it, he instructed, watching her with the impassive patience of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Determined. Not to show weakness, Eliza drank the entire cup without pause, though each swallow was a battle against her body's instinct to reject the bitter medicine. When she finished, she handed back the empty cup with quiet dignity, a nearly imperceptible nod. Approval, perhaps. "Today you will stand," he said. "Tomorrow you will walk. Then we travel." "You seem very certain of my recovery," she observed. "I have seen stronger people die from less," he replied matter-of-factly. "I have seen weaker people survive worse. The difference is not in the body." He tapped his chest. "It is here. You have fire. Now you need purpose." Before she could question this assessment, he rose and left the lodge, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the lingering taste of medicine. True to his prediction, standing proved possible, though not without cost. Her legs trembled beneath. Her weight and dizziness washed over her in waves, but stand she did, first leaning heavily against one of the lodge poles, then tentatively shifting her weight until she could balance unassisted. Each small victory felt monumental after coming, so close to death. When Akecheta returned, he carried an armload of wood and a freshly killed grouse. He paused in the entrance, observing her upright position with that same subtle nod of approval. "Good," was all he said before setting about preparing their meal. They established a pattern that would come to define her time in the winter camp. Akecheta would leave at dawn to hunt or check his traps, returning midday with game or useful items gathered from the land. He spoke little, but every word seemed deliberately chosen. He never asked about her past or the circumstances that led to her abandonment, focusing instead on the immediate needs of survival. In his absence, Eliza forced herself to move, to rebuild her strength through small, painful victories. First standing, then walking the perimeter of the lodge, then venturing outside into the brilliant winter sunshine where the snow reflected light so intensely it hurt her eyes. The camp itself was small and practical, just the main lodge, a lean-to, shelter where Akecheta had stored firewood and smoked meat, and a corral fashioned from branches where his horse and one other stood huddled against the cold. No other people, no other dwellings. It was a solitary winter camp, she realized, not a tribal gathering. When he returned that afternoon, she was outside attempting to gather wood from the pile to contribute to their needs. He watched her for a moment, his expression unreadable, then silently took the bundle from her arms. "Not yet," he said simply. "Inside." That evening, as they ate a stew made from grouse and wild onions, she finally gathered the courage to ask what had been troubling her since she realized the isolation of their situation. "Where is your family? Your tribe?" She hesitated, aware of her ignorance. "Shouldn't you be with them for winter?" Akecheta continued eating, his gaze fixed on the fire. For so long that she thought he might not answer, then, "My wife returned to the spirit world 6 winters ago, coughing sickness brought by traders." His voice remained level, but something in his posture tightened. "My son died 2 summers later, arrow from the Pawnee during a horse raid." "I'm sorry," she said quietly, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. He set his empty bowl aside. "The band winters 20 miles south. I join them when the snow begins to melt. Until then, I hunt alone." "You choose solitude," she observed. "I choose my own company," he corrected, a subtle but important distinction. In grief, many warriors seek death in battle. I sought wisdom in silence. Eliza considered this. Among her people, a grieving widow was expected to wear black, attend church, and eventually remarry, A man who isolated himself after loss would be considered unstable, possibly dangerous. Yet there was nothing unstable about Akacheta. His pain had been channeled into something else, not forgotten but transformed. "And did you find it?" she asked. The wisdom, a ghost of a smile, touched his lips. "I found that wisdom is not something you discover like a hidden spring. It is something you practice, like drawing a bow." He gestured toward the medicine bags, hanging from one of the lodge poles. "I was not born a healer. After they died, I sought the plant knowledge, the healing songs. What I could not prevent for them, perhaps I could prevent for others." The revelation shifted something in her understanding of this man. Not just a warrior who happened upon her by chance, but a healer who had transformed his own wounds into a means of mending others. "Is that why you helped me?" she asked, "as practice for your healing?" His dark eyes met hers directly. "I helped you because you were dying and I was there." Simple, unadorned. The path crossed. I walked it. That night, despite the physical improvement in her condition, Eliza's sleep was troubled by nightmares. She dreamed of the wagon train continuing west without her, of James Harker's face as the caravan pulled away, his expression shifting from regret to indifference to the blank-eyed stare of a corpse. She dreamed of the widow Carson transforming into a raven, pecking at her frozen body at the crossroads. She woke with a gasp, her heart hammering in her chest. Across the fire pit, Akacheta sat awake, whittling something from a piece of cedar. The firelight caught the metal of his small knife and the deep bronze of his skin. He didn't look up, but she knew he was aware of her distress. "The dead walk in dreams," he said quietly. "They are not always gentle visitors." Eliza drew her knees to her chest, wrapping the fur blanket tightly around her shoulders. "It wasn't the dead that frightened me," she admitted. "It was the living, the people who left me behind." He continued his careful carving. "Tell me," he said, "not a command, but an invitation." So she did. The words spilled out into the warm darkness of the lodge. Her family's decision to journey west, despite her mother's fears, the fever that took them both within days of each other, her father lasting long enough only to extract a promise from the wagon master to see her safely to Oregon. She told him of the kindness of James, the wagon master's son, and how that kindness had soured into suspicion among the others. When supplies began to disappear, they looked to the outsider, she said bitterly. The girl with the demon eyes, traveling without family or husband. When they found the medical kit beneath my bedroll, it didn't matter that I denied taking it. They'd already decided I was guilty. Who would benefit from your removal? Akacheta asked, his hands never pausing in their work. Eliza blinked, caught off guard by the question. What do you mean? Among my people, when someone is accused, we ask who gains from the accusation. His knife flicked away another small curl. Of wood. Follow the benefit, find the truth. She considered this, turning over the events in her mind with new perspective. The widow Carson, she said slowly. She didn't like how James spoke to me, and her eldest daughter. The realization dawned with sickening clarity. She wanted him for her daughter. Akacheta nodded once, as if she'd merely confirmed what he already suspected. People rarely hate without reason. Either fear or desire usually hides beneath. The insight was startlingly perceptive from a man whose culture was dismissed as primitive by her own people. She watched him work for several minutes, his strong hands coaxing form from the raw wood with patience and vision. "What are you making?" she asked finally. He held it up, a small animal taking shape, a fox perhaps, or a coyote. "A guide," he said cryptically. Then noticing her confusion, "In my tradition, each person has animal helpers for their journey. Some come in dreams, some in waking life." He turned the carving to examine it from another angle. Coyote is a trickster, but also a teacher. He survives because he adapts. And you think I need that guidance? I think we all do. He set the unfinished carving aside. Sleep now. Tomorrow you will need strength. The next day brought increased activity. Akecheta spent the morning packing provisions and checking his equipment. He presented Eliza with clothing better suited to travel, fur-lined moccasins, thick leggings, and a heavy buffalo robe to wear over her buckskin dress. Each item had clearly been made for someone else, the stitching finer than his weathered hands seemed capable of. "These were your wife's," she said, not a question but a realization. The knowledge made her hesitate. "I can't take these." "She has no need of them now," he said pragmatically. "You do. She would approve." "What was her name?" Eliza asked softly. He paused in his preparations, a shadow crossing his features. "Wichapi," he said finally. "It means star." "It's beautiful," she offered. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. She was. With that, he returned to his preparations. The moment of vulnerability passed, but not forgotten. Eliza donned the offered clothing, finding it nearly a perfect fit. The craftsmanship was exquisite, tiny beadwork along the edges, practical yet beautiful. She felt a strange connection to this unknown woman, this Wichapi who had once sat by. This same fire, crafting beauty in the midst of hardship. By midday they were ready to travel. Akecheta had packed his few possessions onto the second horse, an older mare with a gentle disposition. He helped Eliza mount, adjusting the stirrups with practiced efficiency. "Can you ride?" he asked, looking up at her. "My father taught me," she confirmed, gathering the simple leather reins. "Though it's been some time." He nodded, mounting his own horse, a muscular pinto stallion that danced with barely contained energy. "We ride south, 4 hours today, rest at night, continue tomorrow." "To your people's winter camp?" A brief hesitation. "First to another place, a safer place." The answer raised more questions than it answered. But Eliza had learned that Akecheta revealed information when necessary, not before. She adjusted her seat in the unfamiliar saddle and nodded her readiness. They left the winter camp without ceremony. Akecheta did not look back at the lodge that had sheltered them, nor did he speak any words of farewell to the place. His focus remained entirely forward on the path ahead and the journey to come. The ride proved more challenging than Eliza had anticipated. Though her strength had begun to return, her body was still recovering from its ordeal. The winter landscape was breathtaking but unforgiving, endless white plains broken by stands of skeletal trees and rocky outcroppings. Wind cut across the open spaces, finding every gap in her clothing, despite the quality of Wichapi's garments. Akecheta set a deliberate pace, neither hurried nor lazy. Every hour or so he would stop, allowing the horses to rest and checking on her condition with a glance that assessed more than it asked. He offered her pemmican from a small pouch, a dense mixture of dried meat, fat and berries that sustained without requiring a fire or preparation. "Chew slowly," he instructed. "Let it soften. It will give strength." As the short winter day began to wane, they approached a series of low bluffs. Akecheta led them into a narrow ravine that wound between towering walls of striated rock. The path was barely visible, covered by snowdrifts and shadowed by the high walls on either side. If one didn't know it was there, Eliza realized, they would never find it. The ravine opened suddenly into a small, sheltered valley. Protected on 3 sides by the bluffs, it captured the last rays of the setting sun. A small creek, miraculously unfrozen, bubbled along one edge. Most surprisingly, a structure stood near the base of the western wall, not a Lakota lodge, but a small cabin built of logs and stone. "What is this place?" Eliza asked, unable to hide her astonishment. Akecheta dismounted, coming to help her. Down from her horse, her legs nearly buckled as they touched the ground, stiff from the long ride. "A place between worlds," he answered cryptically. steadying her with a strong hand on her elbow. He led the horses to a lean-to shelter built against the cabin's side, unsaddling them with practiced efficiency before leading Eliza to the cabin. A door. He opened it without hesitation, as if he belonged there. Inside was a single room, simply furnished but unmistakably a blend of two worlds. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A bed with a frame of peeled logs stood in one corner, covered with both homespun blankets and animal furs, a table and two chairs. Shelves holding a curious mixture of objects, pottery vessels, books, dried herbs hanging in bundles, a wooden cross leaning against a medicine wheel. "Whose home is this?" she asked, bewildered by the unexpected discovery. Akecheta knelt at the fireplace, arranging kindling with practiced hands. "It belonged to a Jesuit priest, Father Michel. He came to convert my people." A flint sparked in his hands, catching the dried grass alight. Instead, he learned our ways, became something new, neither fully his old self nor fully Lakota. "And now?" Eliza prompted when he didn't continue. "Now he is with the ancestors, 2 winters ago." He blew gently on the growing flame. "The bluecoats came looking for him when he stopped sending letters. They never found this place." He glanced up at her, the firelight casting his features in sharp relief. "Few know it exists. It is safe." As Akecheta prepared their evening meal, Eliza explored the small cabin, running her fingers along the spines of books written in Latin and French, examining the peculiar harmony of objects from disparate worlds coexisting in this hidden valley. A worn Bible lay open on the small desk, passages underlined in faded ink, notes scribbled in the margins in a language she couldn't read. "He translated your stories," she guessed, gesturing to the annotated text. "Your spiritual beliefs." Akecheta nodded, "And we learned his, not to replace our ways, but to understand." He stirred the pot of stew hanging over the fire. He believed the same Great Spirit spoke to all people, but in different languages. "That would be considered heresy by most ministers I've known," Eliza observed. "By most of my people as well," he countered. "That is why this place exists in the Shadowlands, between worlds, where new truths can grow without being trampled." The concept resonated with her in unexpected ways. All her life she had existed in between, not quite fitting the expectations of others, marked by her unusual, Isa's somehow different. The daughter of a devout mother and a father who questioned every sermon, a young woman traveling without family or husband in a world that demanded both. "How long will we stay here?" she asked, settling at the table as he placed a bowl of fragrant stew before her. "Until it is safe to move on," he replied, joining her with his own portion. "Or until you decide your path." "My path?" He regarded her steadily across the table. "To the fort, where your people will receive you? Or to the Lakota winter camp, where you would be—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Different, but not unwelcome, or somewhere else entirely." The openness of the choice startled her. Since her parents' deaths, choices had been made for her, where she would sleep, what work she would do, even whether she would live or die. The sudden freedom to determine her own direction felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "What would you do?" she asked. "If you were me?" Akecheta considered the question with characteristic seriousness. "I am not you," he said finally. "I cannot walk your path or see with your eyes. One sky, one forest." He set his spoon aside. "But I know this. When the buffalo faces the storm, it survives. When it runs from the storm chases it, and it dies tired. Face the difficulty rather than flee it," she translated. "Face the truth of who you are," he corrected gently. "The rest follows naturally." That night, Eliza slept in the bed while Akecheta made his pallet near the fire. Though the cabin offered more comfort than the lodge had, she found herself restless. her mind turning over the possibilities before her like stones in a river. The fort meant returning to the world she knew, a world that had already rejected her once. The Lakota camp meant entering territory entirely foreign, where she would always be an outsider. Through the cabin's single window, stars blazed in the clear winter sky. Wichapi, she thought. Star. Somewhere among them, perhaps, the spirit of Ikecheta's wife looked down on this strange pairing, the Lakota healer and the abandoned white girl with mismatched eyes. What would she make of it all? Morning would bring decisions. For now, sheltered in this place between worlds, Eliza allowed herself to simply exist in the moment. Neither white settler nor Lakota, neither lost nor found. Simply alive, when she should have been dead. Perhaps that miracle alone was enough to build upon. Dawn arrived with an unexpected sound. Voices. Eliza woke instantly, heart hammering against her ribs as her eyes flew open. Ikecheta was already up, standing motionless. By the window, his body tense as a drawn bowstring. He held one finger to his lips, then gestured for her to stay down. The voices grew louder, men speaking English, their tones casual but purposeful. Military men, by the sound of their clipped words and occasional commands. Soldiers. Ikecheta moved silently to the door, easing it open just enough to peer through the narrow gap. His expression revealed nothing, but Eliza saw his hand move to the knife at his belt. "Cavalry patrol," he said quietly, closing the door. 6 men. "They are not searching, just passing through the valley." "Will they see the cabin?" Eliza whispered, pulling herself into a sitting position, perhaps. The snow hides much, but smoke from the chimney would draw their eye. He moved with deliberate calm, gathering essential items into a small pack. "We must leave, now." The urgency in his normally measured voice sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the winter air. "Why? I'm white. They wouldn't harm me." Ikecheta paused, fixing her with a direct gaze. "You were left to die by your own people. These men," he gestured toward the door, "they have orders to clear the territory of my people, peacefully if possible, with blood if necessary." He tied the pack closed with a quick, practiced motion. A white woman living with a Lakota warrior would raise questions neither of us wants to answer. The truth of his assessment struck her with sudden clarity. Best case, they would rescue her, regardless of her wishes. Worst case, they might assume she was a captive and attack Ikecheta without warning or hesitation. Either way, the fragile sanctuary they had found would shatter. "Where can we go?" she asked, already reaching for her borrowed boots. "There is a place, a cave system in the eastern bluff. We can wait there until they pass." He tossed her the buffalo robe. "Bring only what you need. Leave no trace of yourself." They exited through the rear of the cabin, keeping low and using the lean-to shelter as cover. The horses, thankfully, were already concealed there. Ikecheta led them on foot, moving with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to leaving no trail. Eliza followed in his footsteps literally, placing her feet exactly where he had stepped to minimize their tracks. The cave entrance was barely visible, a dark slash in the rock face partially obscured by scrub pine and accumulated snow. Inside, it opened into a passage tall enough to stand in, winding deeper into the earth. The temperature rose noticeably as they progressed, the bitter winter cold giving way to the steady, mild air of the underground. "The earth breathes here," Ikecheta explained, leading her around a bend where the passage widened into a modest chamber. Hot springs deeper in the mountain. The old ones knew this place, a sanctuary during the harshest winters. Evidence of previous habitation remained, blackened circles from ancient fires, smooth depressions worn into stone seats, even faded paintings on the walls depicting buffalo, eagles, and human figures engaged in what might have been ceremonial dances. How? Far back do these go? Eliza asked, running her fingers lightly over a red ochre handprint pressed against the stone, perhaps centuries earlier. Before my people came to these lands, he replied. Before yours crossed the great water. He set down his pack, removing a small bundle of sage, which he crushed between his palms. This place remembers many who have sought shelter in troubled times. While Akacheta prepared a small, nearly smokeless fire using dried buffalo dung and sparse kindling, Eliza explored the immediate chamber. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady, rhythmic sound that seemed to match her heartbeat. The air smelled of minerals and earth, ancient and somehow comforting. "We'll be safe here?" she asked, returning to the small fire. "From the bluecoats, yes." He arranged their few provisions carefully. "From other dangers, that depends." "What other dangers?" His expression remained impassive. "Some of my people believe these caves are inhabited by spirits, the little people, mischievous, sometimes helpful, sometimes not." He glanced around the chamber. "I have never seen them, but I have heard things I cannot explain." The matter-of-fact way he delivered this information sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. Coming from anyone else, such talk would have sounded like superstition. But Akacheta spoke from experience, not fantasy. "What kind of things?" she pressed. "Voices, movement where there should be none." He met her gaze directly. "Once, when I sought shelter here during a blizzard, I fell asleep alone. When I woke, a fire had been built, and fresh meat lay beside it." He shrugged slightly. "Perhaps I built it myself while walking in dreams. Perhaps not." Before Eliza could respond, a sound echoed from the passage they had entered through, the distinct rhythm of horse hooves on stone. Akacheta extinguished their small fire with a handful of dirt, plunging the chamber into near darkness. Only the faint glow of daylight from the passage illuminated their sanctuary. "Stay here," he whispered, drawing his knife. "If I do not return, follow the passage deeper. There is another exit on the far side of the ridge." "Akacheta," she began, but he was already gone, moving through the shadowed passage like a ghost. Left alone in the semi-darkness, Eliza felt the weight of the mountain above her, the press of ancient stone that had witnessed centuries of human struggle. She found herself, holding her breath, straining to hear any sound beyond the steady drip of water. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, footsteps approached, the familiar measured tread of Akacheta, not the heavy boots of soldiers. Relief washed over her. "They are gone," he said, emerging from the passage. "Their trail leads west. But we should remain here until nightfall." He rekindled their small fire, the light casting long shadows across the cave walls. In that flickering illumination, the ancient paintings seemed to move, the buffalo running, the dancers swaying in their eternal ceremony. "How did you become separated from your people?" Eliza asked as they shared a modest meal of pemmican and dried berries. "You said you winter alone, but join them in spring. Why not stay with the band year-round?" Akacheta studied the flames for a long moment before answering. "After Wichapi and my son died, I walked a dark path. Anger consumed me." His voice remained steady, but something in his eyes shifted. "I led war parties against those I blamed. First, the traders who brought the sickness, then the settlers who supported them. I took many scalps, earned many coups." His hand moved unconsciously to a series of notches carved into the handle of his knife. "I became someone my wife would not have recognized." Eliza absorbed this revelation, seeing him anew, not just as the healer who had saved her, but as a warrior who had taken lives in grief and rage. "What changed?" she asked quietly. "A vision," he replied simply. "After a raid on a settler's homestead, I found a child hiding in a root cellar. A girl no older than my son had been. She had eyes like yours, one blue, one brown. The firelight caught the angles of his face as he continued. I could have killed her. My men expected it. But she looked at me without fear, only sadness. She offered me a piece of bread as if I were a hungry stranger, not an enemy who had just killed her family. He fell silent, the memory clearly still painful. What did you do? Eliza prompted gently. I left her there, told my men the cellar was empty. His gaze remained fixed on the flames. That night, the ancestors visited my dreams, not with approval, for the blood I had spilled, but with sorrow for the path I had chosen. Shappa stood among them, turning away from what I had become. So you stopped fighting, Eliza concluded. No, he corrected. I stopped killing without purpose. I sought the elder healer, asked to learn the medicine ways. The warrior society did not understand. They said grief had made me weak. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps it did. Perhaps it also made me strong in new ways. The revelation transformed her understanding of Akecheta, not simply a man who had experienced loss, but one who had traveled through darkness and emerged, changed, neither fully the vengeful warrior nor completely the peaceful healer, but something forged in the crucible of both experiences. Is that why you helped me? She asked. Because of that girl? Because of my eyes? He considered this, head tilted slightly. Perhaps. The ancestors do not always explain their guidance. He added a small piece of fuel to their fire. Or perhaps it is simpler. Perhaps I am tired of watching people die when I have the power to prevent it. As the day progressed, they remained in the cave, conserving their resources and speaking in low voices. Akecheta shared stories of his people, not the simplistic tales Eliza had heard from missionaries about savages, but complex narratives of honor, spiritual journeys, and the delicate balance between human needs and natural harmony. In return, she told him of her life before the westward journey, her father's work as a schoolteacher in Pennsylvania, her mother's dreams of social advancement, her own secret desire to become a physician despite the barriers to women in medicine. That's why the medical kit being found under my bedroll was so ironic, she explained. I'd actually been studying the contents whenever the wagon train's doctor would allow it. He thought my interest unusual, but not improper. The best weapon is the one your enemy does not expect you to possess, Akecheta observed. Knowledge, in your case. Knowledge that ultimately got me abandoned at a ghost town crossroads, she reminded him with a bitter laugh. Knowledge that kept you alive until help arrived, he countered. You knew to find shelter, to conserve strength, to seek water first when resources were limited. The perspective shift surprised her. She had viewed her situation entirely as victimhood, not as a test of skills she had developed. In my tradition, Akecheta continued, young men and women undergo a vision quest. They go without food or water, alone on the mountain, until the spirits reveal their life's purpose. He gestured to the cave around them. Perhaps your crossroads was such a vision quest, unwanted, but necessary. And what vision came of it? She asked skeptically. You survived, you are here, he shrugged. The meaning will reveal itself when you are ready to see it. As afternoon faded toward evening, Akecheta declared it safe to leave their sanctuary. The cavalry patrol had long since passed beyond the valley, and no new threats had emerged. They exited the cave into twilight, the western sky painted in spectacular bands of crimson and gold. The cabin remained undisturbed, exactly as they had left it. Inside, Akecheta rekindled the fire while Eliza arranged their few possessions. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly. How quickly they had developed routines together, how naturally they moved in each other's space without words or explanation. Two strangers from hostile worlds, yet functioning with unexpected harmony. You're quiet, Akecheta observed as they sat down to a proper meal. I was thinking about choices, she replied, staring into the flames. About paths. And what have you decided? That's just it. I haven't. She looked up at him. A week ago, my only goal was to reach Oregon with the wagon train. Now, she gestured vaguely. Now everything has changed. I have no family waiting, no position secured, just the vague promise of opportunity that drew everyone west. Akacheta listened without interruption, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. The fort would offer protection, she continued, but little else for a woman. Alone. Your people's camp would be safer than I once believed, but I would always be an outsider. And striking out on my own seems... She hesitated. Frightening, he supplied. Yes, she admitted. But also... possible, he finished for her. His perceptiveness continually surprised her. Yes, she repeated softly. For the first time, it seems possible. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling around the cabin's eaves. Inside, the fire popped and settled, sending sparks up the chimney. The contrast was not lost on Eliza. Chaos and comfort, danger and safety, existing side by side just as they always had. There is another option, Akacheta said after a thoughtful silence. What's that? Stay here, he suggested, in this place between worlds. Father Michel maintained this cabin for years, helping both settlers and Lakota without belonging fully to either. He gestured to the books, the medicines, the curious blend of artifacts surrounding them. You have knowledge of your people's healing. I could teach you ours. The valley provides water, game, protection. The proposal startled her. You would stay too? Until spring. Then, as always, I would join my band for the summer hunts. He hesitated, something rare for him. But I would return when the leaves change, as would others who need help. Others? This valley has long been neutral ground, sacred to many peoples. Those who cannot find healing among their own kind sometimes find their way here. His expression grew distant. Outcasts, dreamers, those who see with different eyes. The implication hung in the air between them, that she might find purpose not despite her differences, but because of them. That the very things that had marked her as unsuitable among her own people might become strengths in this liminal space. Before she could respond, a sound caught their attention, distant but distinct. Hoofbeats again, but not the disciplined rhythm of cavalry mounts. These were faster, more urgent. Akacheta was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "Riders," he said, his voice tight with tension. "Coming up the valley?" "Soldiers returning?" Eliza asked, joining him at the window. He shook his head. "No, different approach, less discipline." He squinted into the gathering darkness. 4 riders, civilian clothes. A cold dread settled in Eliza's stomach. The wagon train? Unlikely. They would be far west by now. He reached for his rifle, checking the loading with practiced efficiency. "But perhaps those who know of your abandonment." The riders drew closer, their approach no longer hidden by the terrain. Even in the fading light, details became visible. 4 men, heavily armed, their horses lathered despite the cold. They rode, with purpose, scanning the valley floor as they approached. "They're looking for something," Eliza whispered, "or someone." Recognition dawned as the lead rider came into clearer view. A tall man with a distinctive yellow scarf knotted at his throat. James Harker, the wagon master's son. Behind him rode 3 men she didn't recognize, rougher looking than the wagon train settlers. "I know him," she breathed. "The one in front. He was kind to me. Before." Akacheta's expression revealed nothing, but his posture shifted subtly, from defensive to calculating. "Stay inside," he instructed, "away from the window." "What are you going to do?" "Learn why they have come." He moved to the door with silent precision. Some journeys circle back to their beginning before moving forward. "Akacheta," she called softly as he reached for the door. Be careful. Even kind men can become dangerous when afraid. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than agreement. Then he was gone, slipping into the twilight like a shadow, leaving Eliza alone with questions that multiplied by the second. Why would James track her here? How? Had he found this hidden valley? And most troubling of all, what would happen when these two worlds collided? Through the window, she watched the riders approach the cabin, unaware of the Lakota warrior now moving silently through the gathering darkness to flank them. James Harker raised his hand, bringing the group to a halt about 50 yards from the cabin. Even at this distance, Eliza could see the tension in his posture, the wariness in his scan of the surroundings. "Hello, the cabin," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still evening air. "I'm looking for Eliza Thorne." The sound of her name spoken aloud sent a jolt through her. After days of existing in a world apart, the intrusion of her former life felt jarring, almost violent. She stepped back from the window, heart racing, mind spinning with possibilities both hopeful and terrifying. Outside, the past had come calling. Inside, the future waited to be chosen. And somewhere in the shadows between, Akecheta moved with the patient certainty of a man accustomed to walking between worlds, watching and waiting for the moment when paths would either converge or diverge. "You forever, Eliza Thorne," James Harker called again, his voice edged with urgency. "If you're in there, show yourself. We don't have much time." Eliza remained frozen, her mind racing. The James she remembered had been gentle, thoughtful, the only one who'd spoken against her abandonment. But the man outside seemed different, his companions unfamiliar and rough-looking. She edged closer to the window, careful to stay hidden while observing. James dismounted, handing his reins to one of the other men. In the deepening twilight, she could make out his features, more haggard than she remembered, a fresh scar across his cheek that hadn't been there when the wagon train left her behind. "We know someone's here," one of the other men called out, gesturing toward the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. "Might as well come out peaceful-like." Movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the darker shadows beneath the trees. Akecheta, circling behind the riders with the silent precision of a predator. She held her breath, watching him advance undetected. If he chose to attack now, James and his companions would never know what hit them, but Akecheta didn't strike. Instead, he positioned himself strategically, rifle ready but not yet raised, watching, evaluating, waiting for the situation to reveal its true nature. James took another step toward the cabin. "Eliza, please, if you're alive, if you're in there, it's not safe out here." His voice dropped, becoming almost plaintive. "I came back for you. I know what my father and the others did was wrong." Something in his tone gave her pause. Genuine fear. Not for himself, but for her. Before she could reconsider, Eliza moved to the cabin door and opened it just enough to be seen in the gap. "James," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady despite her pounding heart. Relief washed visibly over his features. "Thank God," he breathed. "You're alive." "No thanks to your father," she replied, not moving from the doorway. "Or the widow." "Carson," James's expression hardened. "I know, that's why I'm here." He took another step forward. "May I approach? There's much to explain, and little time." Eliza hesitated, then nodded once. "Just you. Your friends stay where they are." He turned, signaling the others to remain with the horses. One of them, a burly man with a beard that obscured most of his face, spat into the snow and muttered something Eliza couldn't hear. James ignored him, approaching the cabin with his hands deliberately visible. When he reached the door, Eliza could see the exhaustion etched in his face, the dried blood on his collar. "What happened to your cheek?" she asked. His hand rose unconsciously to the wound. "My father, when I told him I was going back for you," the admission startled her. "You left the wagon train." "Deserted it," he corrected grimly. "Along with these men, trappers I hired in the last settlement." His eyes darted past her, scanning the cabin interior. "Are you alone?" Before she could answer, a quiet voice spoke from behind him. "She is not." James whirled around, hand instinctively, reaching for his pistol before freezing at the sight of Akacheta standing just 10 feet away, rifle held casually but unmistakably ready. "Easy," Eliza cautioned, stepping outside to position herself between them. "He saved my life. He's a friend." James stared at Akacheta, clearly reassessing the situation. "A Lakota," he said quietly, his hand moving slowly away from his weapon. "A healer," Eliza corrected, "and a warrior. I'd be dead without him." Something unspoken passed between the two men, a moment of recognition perhaps, or evaluation. Then Akacheta lowered his rifle slightly, a minimal gesture but significant. "Why have you come?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the tension. James turned his attention back to Eliza. "To warn you, both of you apparently." He glanced nervously at the trappers waiting with the horses. "The wagon train was attacked 3 days west of here. Blackfoot raiding party. They killed 4, including the widow Carson." A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air ran down Eliza's spine. "And the medical supplies that were supposedly stolen?" she asked, already suspecting the answer. "Found in the widow's personal chest," James confirmed bitterly, "along with other items reported missing over the past months. My father didn't want to admit she'd played him for a fool, so he broke off, the muscle in his jaw working. Well, that hardly matters now." "Why does any of this concern us?" Akacheta asked, his tone revealing nothing of his thoughts. James sighed heavily. "Because the survivors needed someone to blame. The Blackfoot took scalps, but left most of the bodies intact. Someone remembered stories of a savage who'd been seen watching our camp weeks earlier. Lakota, not Blackfoot," Akacheta observed dispassionately. "To them, there's no difference," James replied. "Just Indians causing trouble. They're organizing a war party with soldiers from the fort. They plan to sweep these hills, kill any natives they find." His eyes locked with Eliza's. "And they know you were left behind. If they find you alive with him—" He didn't need to finish. The implications were clear. At best, Akacheta would be executed as a murderer and kidnapper. At worst, they would both be killed to protect the lie. "How did you find us?" Akacheta asked, the question sharp with suspicion. James hesitated. "The priest, Father Michel. Before he died, he helped a trapper with frostbite. Man never forgot the hidden valley that saved his life." Akacheta's expression darkened. "The sacred places are never as hidden as we wish." "How long do we have?" Eliza asked, the practicalities suddenly overwhelming the shock. 2 days. "Maybe 3, James replied. The snow slowed them down. "But they're coming with dogs and trackers." He glanced at the darkening sky. "We need to go tonight. I know a route south that will get us past the fort's patrol lines." "Us?" Eliza questioned. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across James's face. "I had hoped. That is, I came to take you somewhere safe. A trading post run by a Frenchman and his crow wife. No questions asked about who you are or where you came from." The offer hung in the cold air between them, a chance to return to some version of her former world, with someone who had risked everything to find her. Eliza looked from James to Akacheta, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down upon her. "I need a moment," she said finally. "Please." James nodded, retreating a few steps to give her space. Akacheta remained where he was, silent and watchful as the night deepened around them. Inside the cabin, Eliza quickly gathered essential supplies: food, medicines, an extra knife from Father Michel's collection. Her mind raced with possibilities and dangers. She had just begun to imagine a future here, in this place between worlds. Now, even that tenuous sanctuary was threatened. When she emerged, both men stood exactly where she'd left them, each seemingly prepared to wait all night if necessary. The tableau struck her suddenly as symbolic. Two worlds, two paths, both waiting for her decision. "We can't stay here," she said, the practicality of survival overriding all other considerations. "If what James says is true, they'll find this place eventually." Akecheta nodded once, accepting the reality without emotion. "The winter camp of my people lies 4 days south. The Frenchman's trading post, perhaps 6 days west. You would come with us?" James asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I go my own way," Akecheta replied evenly, "but for now that way leads south." He glanced at Eliza. "Unless you choose otherwise." The burden of choice fell heavy on her shoulders. "I don't know these men you've brought," she said to James, nodding toward the trappers who watched impatiently from their horses. "Hired guns," James admitted. "Not friends, but they'll get us where we need to go." "For a price," Akecheta observed. "Everything has a price out here," James countered, a new edge to his voice. Eliza studied his face in the fading light, searching for the boy. She'd known on the wagon train. He was there, beneath the new lines of hardship and the healing scar, but changed, harder perhaps, or simply more determined. "I'll go south," she decided finally, "toward the Lakota camp." James's expression fell. "Eliza, think carefully. A white woman among—" "I've made my choice," she interrupted firmly. "You're welcome to ride with us, James. I value your warning and your courage in coming back. But I won't go to the trading post." For a moment she thought he might argue further. Instead, he simply asked, "Why?" "Because I've seen both worlds now," she replied honestly. "And I'm not ready to choose either one completely." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "The between place," he murmured, glancing around the cabin and its curious blend of cultures. "Father Michel used to speak of it." "You knew him?" Eliza asked, surprised. A sad smile touched James's lips. "He baptized me. Taught me letters when my father thought education was wasted on a boy destined for the frontier." He sighed heavily. He also spoke of the wisdom found in native ways. My father called it heresy. The revelation cast James in a new light, not just the wagon master's son who had shown her kindness, but someone who had also been touched by the vision of a world where different truths could coexist. "Your men will not like this change of our plan," Akecheta observed pragmatically. James turned to look at the trappers, who had begun to mutter among themselves. "No, they won't," he agreed. "They were promised payment at the trading post. Then go with them," Eliza suggested. "Complete your obligation. We'll find our own way south." "And leave you again?" James shook his head vehemently. "No, not a second time." His determination created a new complication. Eliza looked to Akecheta, who'd been observing the exchange with characteristic patience. 3 can travel faster than 7, the Lakota warrior noted. But in dangerous territory, more eyes see further. The practical assessment surprised her. She'd expected him to reject James and his companions outright. Instead, he was weighing the tactical advantages. "You would accept their company?" she asked. "He would accept useful allies against a common enemy," he clarified. "The question is whether they would accept my leadership on the journey south." James considered this, then nodded slowly. "I can convince them. Gold speaks louder than prejudice. Out here," he glanced toward the increasingly restless trappers. "Give me a moment." As James walked back to his companions, Eliza turned to Akecheta. "Are you certain about this? Can we trust them?" "Trust is earned, not given," he replied. "But survival often requires uncomfortable alliances." His dark eyes followed James as he spoke with the trappers, gesturing emphatically. "The young man came back for you when others left you to die. That counts for something." The simple observation carried weight, coming from a man who measured words as carefully as he did actions. She watched as the trapper's body language shifted from resistant to reluctantly agreeable. Whatever James had said, or more likely promised, had worked. "We leave within the hour," Akacheta instructed when James returned. "Take only what you can carry on horseback. The cabin must appear abandoned, not fled from in haste." James nodded, accepting the Lakota's authority with surprising ease. "I told them you know paths south that avoid both cavalry patrols and hostile tribes, that you're a scout, not just a warrior." "A useful lie," Akacheta acknowledged, though his expression remained unreadable. "Now we must make it true." The preparations moved with swift efficiency. Akacheta and Eliza gathered only essential supplies from the cabin, deliberately leaving enough personal items to suggest a temporary absence rather than permanent departure. James negotiated with the trappers, distributing gold from a pouch he kept inside his coat, advance payment for their cooperation. The leader of the trappers, the burly bearded man who had spat earlier, finally approached the cabin. Up close, Eliza could see the hardness in his eyes, the calculation behind each glance. "Blackwood," he introduced himself curtly. "These here are Finch, Tanner, and Powell." He jerked a thumb toward the other men, who nodded with varying degrees of reluctance. "Eliza Thorne," she replied with equal brevity. Blackwood's gaze slid past her to Akacheta, who was securing packs to his horse. "Harker says you know paths south that'll keep us breathing. That true, Injun?" Akacheta straightened, meeting the trapper's challenging stare with calm dignity. "I know the ways of those who hunt men, because I have been both hunter and hunted," he said simply. "Follow my lead exactly, and you may live to spend your gold." Something in his tone, not a threat, but absolute certainty, caused Blackwood to reassess the Lakota warrior. After a moment, he nodded brusquely. "Fair enough, but we ride together, not behind you like obedient dogs." "As you wish," Akacheta replied. "But when danger comes, obedient dogs live longer than proud wolves." The philosophical observation clearly caught Blackwood off guard. He blinked, then barked a short laugh. "Maybe so, Injun, maybe so." Within the hour, they were mounted and ready to depart. Eliza took a final look at the cabin, this curious sanctuary that had offered a glimpse of a different possible future. Father Michel's books still lined the shelves, his cross still leaned against the medicine wheel, the fire still smoldered in the hearth. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if they might someday return. As if reading her thoughts, Akacheta spoke, quietly from beside her. "Places of power remain. It is people who come and go." "Like dust in the wind?" she asked, recalling a phrase from her father's Bible. "Like water in the stream," he corrected gently, "always moving, always returning in different form." The philosophical exchange was interrupted by James, who rode up beside them. "We should move out. The night's clear and the moon will rise soon." Akacheta nodded, turning his horse toward the southern edge of the valley. "We follow the creek until it joins the river, then southeast through the high passes. The route is longer but less watched." With that, they set off into the winter night, an unlikely company bound together by circumstance and necessity. A Lakota warrior, a frontier girl with mismatched eyes, a wagon master's son with a scarred face, and 4 trappers motivated by gold rather than loyalty. The moon rose as they left the sheltered valley, casting the landscape in silver and shadow. The horses' breath formed clouds in the cold air, their hooves muffled by the snow. For the first hour, they rode in silence, each lost in private thoughts. Eliza found herself positioned between James and Akacheta, a physical manifestation of her spiritual state, caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Yet for the first time since her family's death, she felt a strange sense of agency. Not safety, certainly not certainty, but the power of choice. The trappers rode in a loose formation behind them, Blackwood occasionally murmuring directions to his companions. Though they had accepted the arrangement, tension radiated from them like heat from a stove. These were men accustomed to following their own counsel, not taking orders from a savage. As they descended into a narrow ravine, following the creek Akacheta had mentioned, James moved his horse closer to Eliza's. "I never believed you stole those supplies," he said quietly. "I want you to know that. Yet you rode away with the others," she observed, the memory still raw despite everything that had happened since. He winced visibly. "My father gave me a choice, obey him or be left behind myself." Shame colored his voice. "I told myself I'd come back with help, that abandoning you temporarily was better than both of us being stranded." Convenient reasoning, she noted, though without the bitterness she might have expected to feel. "Yes," he admitted, surprising her with his candor. "I've had many sleepless nights to consider my cowardice." His hand rose unconsciously to the scar on his cheek. "When the attack came and we found the widow's cache, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I confronted my father publicly." "Hence the scar," Eliza surmised. James nodded. "He struck me with his riding crop. Said no son of his would betray the wagon. Master's authority." A humorless smile twisted his lips. "I told him I'd rather be no son of his than party to murder." The blunt description of her abandonment startled her. "You called it murder. What else would you call leaving someone to die slowly in a ghost town?" he countered. "They knew what they were doing, Eliza. They just didn't want your blood directly." On their hands, from ahead, Akacheta raised a hand for silence. The entire party halted immediately, sensing the sudden alertness in his posture. "What is it?" Blackwood hissed from behind them. Akacheta pointed wordlessly toward the ridgeline above the ravine. For a moment, Eliza saw nothing. Then, movement. It caught her eye, a figure silhouetted briefly against the night sky before disappearing again. "Cavalry scout," James whispered, his hand moving to his rifle. Akacheta shook his head. "Not military. Wrong shape." His eyes narrowed as he studied the ridge. "Blackfoot. Probably hunting party." The revelation sent a ripple of tension through the group. If James's story was accurate, it was Blackfoot warriors who had attacked the wagon train, precipitating the very crisis they were fleeing. "How many?" Blackwood demanded, suddenly all business. "3, maybe 4, Akacheta replied. "They have the high ground, which means they've already seen our track in the snow." "Can we outrun them?" Eliza asked. The Lakota warrior considered their options with methodical calm. "Not with tired horses and deep snow. Better to find defensible position and make them reconsider the value of pursuit." James pointed to a cluster of boulders jutting from the ravine wall about 100 yards ahead. "There, natural barricade with clear lines of sight." Akacheta nodded approval. "Move slowly, no sudden movements to trigger chase response." As they urged their horses forward at a deliberate walk, Eliza felt eyes upon them, watching, calculating, assessing the potential value of an attack versus its risk. The sensation prickled along her spine, raising the hair on the back of her neck. "They're flanking us, Powell," the youngest of the trappers murmured nervously. "Let them," Akacheta countered. "When a wolf circles, it is often looking for weakness, not immediate attack." The calm confidence in his assessment steadied the group. They reached the boulder formation without incident, quickly dismounting and securing the horses in the protected space behind the largest rocks. With practiced efficiency, Akacheta directed the positioning of their defense, James and 2 of the trappers facing the approach from the creek bed, Blackwood and Powell covering the ridge, Akacheta himself watching the rear approach. Eliza was placed in the center, with access to the medical supplies and ammunition. "We wait," Akecheta instructed. They will either attack or move on. Attacking 7 armed travelers for no clear purpose would be foolish. Tell that to the folks in our wagon train, Finch muttered darkly. A wagon train carries valuable goods, Akecheta replied evenly. We carry only ourselves and basic supplies, different calculation. The logic was sound, but did little to ease the tension as they settled in to wait. Minutes stretched into an hour. The cold seeped through Eliza's layers despite the buffalo robe wrapped around her shoulders. Occasionally, they would catch glimpses of movement along the ridgeline, confirmation that they were indeed being observed. Why don't they just move on? James whispered, his breath fogging in the chill air. Curiosity, Akecheta suggested. A Lakota traveling with whites is unusual. They wonder what value I might have that keeps me alive in such company. The blunt assessment cast their situation in a new light. To outside observers, their party must indeed present a confusing picture, one that defied the usual dynamics of frontier relations. As the moon reached its zenith, Akecheta made a decision. Rising to his full height, he stepped out from behind the protective boulders and called out in a language Eliza didn't recognize, his voice strong and clear in the night air. "What's he doing?" Blackwood hissed, raising his rifle. Parleying, James replied, placing a restraining hand on the trapper's arm. "Wait." After a tense moment, a voice responded from the darkness. A brief exchange followed, with Akecheta gesturing toward their group several times. Finally, he turned back to them. "They will allow us to pass," he announced. "I have convinced them we are not worth the trouble." "Just like that?" Powell asked skeptically. "I told them we are pursued by bluecoats," Akecheta explained. "That we share a common enemy. It is not friendship, but it is enough for tonight." The revelation of this diplomatic solution impressed Eliza more than any show of force could have. Once again, Akecheta had demonstrated a depth of understanding that transcended the simplistic narratives of savage and civilized she had been raised with. They remounted carefully, continuing their journey south with renewed awareness of the complex landscape they traversed, not just physically, but politically and culturally as well. The Blackfoot shadows melted away, honoring the tenuous truce Akecheta had negotiated. As they rode, Eliza found herself wondering what other assumptions about this frontier might prove equally shallow under scrutiny. The neat divisions between white and Indian, civilized and wild, safe and dangerous, all seemed increasingly arbitrary, like lines drawn in sand rather than carved in stone. They made camp just before dawn in a sheltered copse of pines, far enough from their previous position to feel secure, but not so far as to exhaust their horses. As Akecheta and James conferred over their route for the following night, Eliza sat apart, watching the first pale light of morning transform the eastern horizon. Blackwood settled nearby, offering her a sip from a flask of whiskey which she politely declined. The trapper studied her with undisguised curiosity. "Never seen eyes like yours before," he commented. "One blue, one green. That's some kind of omen where you come from?" "Some thought so," she replied neutrally. He took another pull from his flask. "Way I see it, we're all marked somehow out here. Some just show it more than others." He gestured toward James and his facial scar, then to Akecheta's braids adorned with coup markers. "Frontier writes itself on your skin, one way or another." The observation, unexpectedly philosophical from the gruff trapper, lingered in Eliza's mind as exhaustion finally claimed her. She drifted into uneasy sleep as the others established watches, dreaming of crossroads that multiplied endlessly before her, each path leading to a different version of herself, each marked by choices she hadn't yet made. 3 days of traveling by night and hiding by day had taken its toll on all of them. The unlikely company moved south through increasingly rugged terrain, following game trails and ancient pathways known only to Akecheta. Their progress was steady but cautious, each mile bringing them closer to the Lakota winter camp, and further from the pursuing forces they had yet to encounter. On the fourth morning, as dawn painted the eastern sky in lavender and gold, they made camp in a secluded box canyon. Sheltered by high stone walls and a dense grove of pine at its entrance, the location offered both protection and the luxury of a small fire, concealed from distant observers by the natural features of the landscape. Eliza sat near the flames, grateful for their warmth as she inventoried their dwindling medical supplies. The past days had hardened her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her hands no longer blistered from the rains, her body adjusted to the rhythm of long rides and brief rest. Even the bitter cold seemed less penetrating, as if her very blood had thickened against it. Across the fire, James dozed fitfully, his face troubled even in sleep. The scar on his cheek had begun to heal, but the wound to his spirit remained raw. Each night, he woke shouting from nightmares he refused to discuss. The wagon train massacre, Eliza suspected. Some horrors couldn't be outrun, no matter how far or fast you traveled. The trappers had established their own small camp within the larger perimeter, maintaining a careful distance that spoke of lingering distrust. Blackwood, their apparent leader, had proven surprisingly reliable, if not particularly friendly. His men followed his lead, contributing to watches and hunting parties without complaint, but keeping to themselves otherwise. Ikecheta returned from scouting the canyon's upper reaches, moving silently through the morning shadows. He settled beside her, his expression thoughtful. "We are being followed," he said without preamble, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Eliza's heart quickened. "The war party from the fort?" He shook his head. "No, smaller group, perhaps 3 riders. They keep their distance, but their track has shadowed ours for at least a day." "Could they be Blackfoot?" she asked, remembering their earlier encounter. "Possible," he acknowledged, "but their pattern suggests different purpose. They do not hunt us. They observe." Before she could question him further, Blackwood approached, the perpetual wariness in his eyes sharpened to active suspicion. "Pow-wow over?" he asked gruffly, squatting down across from them. "Anything the rest of us should know?" Ikecheta studied the trapper for a moment, then replied with characteristic directness. "We have shadows, not immediate threat but concerning." To Eliza's surprise, Blackwood merely nodded, unsurprised. "Noticed that yesterday. Figured you had too." He pulled out his pipe, packing it methodically. "Question is, what are they waiting for?" "An opportunity," Ikecheta suggested. "Or confirmation?" "Of what?" Eliza asked. Blackwood struck a match, the small flame illuminating the deep lines of his weathered face. "Of who's worth killing and who's worth capturing." He puffed his pipe alight. "Way I see it, a Lakota scalp don't fetch much compared to a live white woman in these parts." The blunt assessment sent a chill through Eliza that had nothing to do with the morning air. She had been so focused on escaping the immediate danger of the fort's war party that she hadn't fully considered the broader perils of their journey. "We reach my people's winter camp tomorrow," Ikecheta said, seemingly unperturbed by Blackwood's observation. "The followers will either show themselves before then or turn back." "Unless they're waiting for us to lead them straight to your camp," James interjected, apparently awake and listening. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "A war party would value that information." Ikecheta's expression remained impassive, but something hardened in his eyes. "I have not survived this long by leading enemies to my people's doorstep." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Eliza realized they had reached a critical juncture, one where the tenuous trust between them might fracture irreparably. "What do you propose?" she asked Ikecheta, deliberately using a tone that acknowledged his authority in their current circumstances. He considered for a moment. "We change our route, create false trail leading west, while we continue south through more difficult terrain." "Split. Up, you mean?" Blackwood clarified, exhaling a cloud of pipe smoke. For part of the day, Akecheta confirmed. 3 continue south, myself, Eliza, and 1 other. The rest create convincing westward trail, then double back to rendezvous point. By nightfall, risky, James observed, if either group encounters trouble. All paths hold risk now, Akecheta countered. This distributes it more strategically. Blackwood tapped his pipe against his boot, considering. Makes sense, he admitted grudgingly. I'll take my boys west, make enough noise to draw attention. Harker goes with you too. He fixed Akecheta with a hard stare. But if you ain't at the meeting point by moonrise, we're coming looking, and we won't be friendly about it. The implicit threat hung in the air between them. Akecheta merely nodded, accepting both the plan and the warning without comment. As the others dispersed to prepare for their respective journeys, Eliza found herself alone with Akecheta once more. "You trust them to return?" she asked quietly, watching as the trappers began breaking down their small camp. "Trust is not relevant," he replied pragmatically. "Gold is. Harker paid them to deliver you safely. They will not abandon that purpose while payment remains uncollected." The mercenary calculation should have disturbed her, but Eliza found it oddly reassuring. In a landscape where higher principles often faltered, basic human greed remained, reliably predictable. "And James," she pressed, "why include him with us rather than with the trappers?" Akecheta's gaze shifted to where James was checking his horse's tack. "Because his loyalty is to you, not to gold, and because a man who defies his father for a matter of principle is worth watching closely." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Either he is exceptionally honorable or exceptionally dangerous, perhaps both." The insight revealed yet another layer to Akecheta's thinking. His apparent stoicism masked a nuanced understanding of human motivation that continually surprised her. By mid-morning, their plans were set. Blackwood and his 3 companions would head west, making an obvious trail that suggested their entire party had changed direction. Meanwhile, Akecheta would lead Eliza and James south through a series of narrow ravines that offered concealment at the cost of more difficult travel. They would rendezvous at moonrise, near a distinctive rock formation Akecheta had described as the Sleeping Bear. As they prepared to separate, Blackwood approached Eliza, removing something from inside his coat. "Take this," he said gruffly, offering her a small Derringer pistol. "It ain't much, but it's better than nothing if things go sideways." The unexpected gesture took her aback. "I don't know how to use it," she admitted. "Point and pull," he replied with a shrug. "Ain't complicated. Just don't point it at anything you don't intend to destroy." He hesitated, then added awkwardly, "My wife had eyes like yours, different colors. Folks called her cursed, but she was the best thing ever happened to me." Before Eliza could respond to this surprising revelation, he turned and walked away, bellowing orders to his men with renewed gruffness, as if to compensate for the moment of vulnerability. With final arrangements confirmed, the 2 groups parted ways. Eliza watched the trappers disappear into the western end of the canyon, their horses kicking up small clouds of dust as they deliberately created an obvious trail. Then she turned to follow Akecheta and James into a narrow cleft in the canyon's southern wall, a passage so discreet she wouldn't have noticed it without guidance. The day that followed tested them in ways the previous journey hadn't. The route. Akecheta chose rarely permitted mounted travel, forcing them to lead their horses through tight passages and across treacherous scree slopes. By midday, Eliza's legs ached from the effort, her hands raw from gripping rock faces and guiding her. Reluctant mare across difficult terrain, James fared little better, his city-bred background evident in his struggles with the landscape. Only Akecheta moved with effortless confidence, reading the terrain like a familiar text, finding secure footholds where the others saw only danger. They spoke little, conserving breath for the demanding journey. When they paused briefly to rest, and drink from a small spring hidden among the rocks, James finally broke the silence. "Who do you think is following us?" he asked, wiping sweat from his brow despite the winter chill. "Army scouts wouldn't be so cautious. They'd simply confront us." Akacheta knelt by the spring, refilling their water skins with methodical precision. "There are many possibilities," he replied. "Blackfoot scouts, bounty hunters, perhaps even my own people." "Your people?" Eliza questioned. "Why would they shadow us instead of making contact?" "To evaluate," he explained simply. "A Lakota warrior traveling with whites would raise questions. They would watch to determine if I come as friend or as betrayer." The statement hung heavy in the air. For the first time, Eliza considered the risk Akacheta himself was taking by helping them, not just from white authorities, but potentially from his own tribe as well. "What will happen when we reach your winter camp?" she asked the question. Suddenly pressing, Akacheta secured the water skins before answering. "You will be given shelter while the council decides your status. As for him," he nodded toward James, "that depends on many factors. His father is known to our people, not favorably." "I'm not my father," James stated firmly. "No," Akacheta agreed, studying him, "but blood ties are not easily dismissed among my people or yours." They continued their journey as afternoon shadows lengthened across the ravines. Each hour brought them closer to the rendezvous point, yet the terrain grew increasingly challenging. At one particularly narrow passage, they were forced to blindfold the horses to lead them across a natural stone bridge spanning a dizzying drop. Eliza found herself drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. The frontier girl, who had left Boston 6 months earlier with gloved hands and polished boots, would never have recognized the woman who now scrambled across rock faces without hesitation, who drank from mountain springs without concern for propriety, who had learned to read the land's warnings as clearly as any printed text. As twilight descended, Akacheta signaled a halt. They had reached a vantage point overlooking a broad valley. In the distance, Eliza could make out the distinctive rock formation he had described. The Sleeping Bear, a massive outcropping that did indeed resemble a slumbering grizzly when viewed from their position. "The rendezvous point," he confirmed, pointing to a small meadow at the formation's base. "We will reach it by full dark." "Any sign of our shadows?" James asked, scanning the landscape with narrowed eyes. Akacheta shook his head. "Not since midday, but that means little. In this terrain, a skilled tracker can remain hidden while following obvious prey." "Comforting," James muttered. They descended carefully into the valley as the last light faded. From the sky, stars emerged in brilliant profusion, undimmed by the smoke or lights of civilization. The Sleeping Bear loomed larger as they approached, its massive silhouette darker than the surrounding night. No sign of Blackwood and the others greeted them at the meadow. Akacheta surveyed the area with practiced eyes, then directed them to a sheltered position among fallen boulders at the base of the formation. "We wait," he said simply, unsaddling his horse with practiced efficiency. "They may be delayed by the longer route." James paced restlessly, checking his rifle and pistol with obsessive attention. "Or they've run into trouble," he suggested, "or decided gold isn't worth the risk after all." "They will come," Akacheta stated with quiet certainty. The trapper leader gave his word. He will keep it. Eliza settled against one of the boulders, wrapping her buffalo robe tighter around her shoulders. The night had turned bitterly cold, their elevated position exposing them to winds that cut like knives through even the warmest clothing. Without a fire, they had only body heat and movement to ward off the encroaching chill. As if reading her thoughts, Akacheta produced a small pouch from his saddlebag. "Pemmican," he said, offering her a portion. "Eat slowly. The fat will warm you from within." She accepted gratefully, watching as he shared the remainder with James. The simple act of breaking bread, or in this case pemmican, held a ceremonial quality in such circumstances. Three people from vastly different worlds, sharing sustenance under the vast indifference of the stars. "Tell me about your winter camp," she requested, partly from genuine curiosity and partly to distract herself from the cold and the absence of their companions. Akasheta considered her request, then began speaking in the measured cadence that had become familiar to her. 40 lodges arranged in the sacred circle, the council fire at center, buffalo hide teepees painted with the visions and accomplishments of each family, smoke rising through center holes to carry prayers to the Creator. His description painted a vivid picture, not of the savage encampment depicted in lurid penny novels, but of an ordered society with its own beliefs, protocols, and beauty. "Children play stickball games on the packed snow," he continued. "Elders tell winter stories that can only be shared when snow covers the ground. Women work hides and quills, while men repair weapons and plan spring hunts." A distant look entered his eyes. "Life continues, even as the white man's world presses closer each year." "Will they accept me?" Eliza asked softly. "Truly." Akacheta's gaze returned to her face. "There will be suspicion, questions, but many will remember Father Michel, who came as stranger and became ally. Some will see your different-colored eyes as sign from Creator." He paused, then added with rare directness, "I will speak for you. That will matter." The simple statement carried more weight than any elaborate promise. Might have. In the brief time she had known him, Eliza had come to understand that Akacheta's word, once given, was immovable as the mountains themselves. James, who had been listening silently, suddenly tensed. "Someone's coming," he whispered, raising his rifle toward the western approach to the meadow. Akacheta rose in a single fluid motion, moving to a position where he could observe without being easily seen. 3 riders, he confirmed after a moment, moving with purpose, not caution. "Blackwood," Eliza suggested hopefully. "Perhaps." But the Lakota warrior's posture suggested he expected otherwise. As the riders drew closer, their outlines became more distinct against the starlit landscape. 3 figures on horseback, moving at a deliberate pace that suggested neither pursuit nor fear. Not Blackwood and his trappers, who would have approached with the casual confidence of men returning to their own companions. "Stay hidden," Akacheta instructed, retreating to their sheltered position among the boulders. "Let them reveal their purpose first." The riders entered the meadow, stopping about 50 yards from their concealed position. For several long moments nothing happened. Then one of the riders dismounted and stepped forward, hands deliberately held away from weapons. "Akacheta!" a voice called out, speaking in English rather than Lakota. "I know you are watching, brother. We come in peace." Beside her, Eliza felt Akacheta stiffen in recognition. "Chayton," he murmured, surprise evident in his voice. Then, to her and James, "Stay here. He is Lakota, but not from my band." Before either could object, Akacheta stepped out from their shelter, moving into the open meadow with the balanced readiness of a man prepared for either greeting or combat. Eliza and James exchanged glances, then silently shifted position to observe while remaining concealed as instructed. The dismounted rider, Chayton, approached Akacheta slowly. Even at a distance, Eliza could see he was younger than Akacheta, perhaps 30 winters, with the distinctive bearing of a warrior. They spoke briefly in Lakota, then switched to English, presumably for the benefit of Chayton's still-mounted companions. "The council sent us to find you," Chayton was saying. "Rumors reach the camp. A Lakota traveling with whites, including a woman with spirit-touched eyes. Some said you had been captured, others that you had betrayed the people." He shook his head. "I told them neither could be true of Akacheta." "You speak wisely as always," Akecheta replied, clasping the younger man's arm in greeting. The woman was abandoned to die. I found her as the cold was claiming her. The Creator placed her in my path for a purpose not yet fully revealed. Chaitan nodded, accepting this explanation without further question. And the others who travel with you? A young man who defied his people to warn us of danger, and trappers who guide us past the Bluecoats' patrols. The trappers should have arrived before you. A shadow crossed Chaitan's face. We encountered them 2 hours ago. They had been attacked. Eliza's heart clenched. James shifted beside her, his hand tightening on his rifle. Blackfoot? Akecheta asked. Chaitan shook his head grimly. Bluecoats. A patrol of 6. They caught the trappers making camp and demanded to know their business. He glanced toward the boulders where Eliza and James remained hidden. One of them, the leader, I think, refused to answer. The soldiers shot him and took the others prisoner. Blackwood. The revelation hit Eliza with unexpected force. The gruff trapper with his hidden depths and unexpected kindness had died protecting their secret. How do you know this? Akecheta pressed. We were tracking your party, keeping distance. As our instructions required, we witnessed the attack but could not intervene without revealing ourselves. Regret colored Chaitan's voice. The soldiers spoke of a reward for information about a Lakota traveling with a white woman. They believe the woman was taken against her will. James could contain himself no longer. Rising from their concealment, he stepped forward, ignoring Eliza's attempt to restrain him. That's a lie, he stated firmly, approaching the 2 Lakota men with his rifle pointed deliberately at the ground. She travels by choice. I can testify to that. Chaitan's companions immediately raised their weapons, but he gestured for them to hold. Who are you to speak for her? He demanded. James Harker, he replied, stopping beside Akecheta. Son of the wagon master who abandoned her. The admission clearly surprised Chaitan. You betray your own father. I choose truth over loyalty to a lie, James corrected. The woman Eliza was falsely accused and left to die. I returned to find her alive thanks to Akecheta's intervention. Now my father leads a war party that seeks to silence us both and claim vengeance on any Lakota they encounter. Eliza realized the moment had come for her to reveal herself as well. Rising from the shelter of the boulders, she moved to join the men in the moonlit meadow. Chaitan's companions murmured among themselves as they caught sight of her mismatched eyes, clearly visible even in the dim light. I speak for myself, she stated firmly, finding strength in claiming her own voice after so long being spoken for by others. I owe my life to Akecheta. I travel with him willingly, seeking shelter among his people until this danger passes. She met Chaitan's evaluating gaze directly. I have no quarrel with the Lakota. My quarrel is with those who would use fear and lies to justify violence. A long silence followed her declaration. Chaitan studied her with careful attention, then turned back to Akecheta. The council must hear this directly, he decided. We can reach the winter camp by tomorrow's sunset if we travel through the day. What about Blackwood's men? James asked. We can't just abandon them to the soldiers. Chaitan shook his head. They are already bound for the fort. Nothing can be done for them now without risking all our lives. And the war party? Eliza pressed. How close are they? 2 days behind, perhaps 3, Chaitan replied. They follow your original trail, not yet aware of your change in direction, but they have Pawnee trackers with them who will eventually find the true path. Akecheta absorbed this information with characteristic calm. Then we ride now, he decided. Tonight, without waiting for dawn. The decision made, they quickly prepared for departure. Chaitan provided fresh horses for Eliza and James from those they had brought as spares, allowing for greater speed on the journey ahead. As they worked, the Lakota warrior spoke quietly. with Akacheta in their native tongue, a conversation that seemed both intense and personal. When they finished, Akacheta approached Eliza as she adjusted her saddle. "Chayton brings news of another kind," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "A white woman lives among my people. She came as a captive many winters ago, but chose to remain when given opportunity to leave. Her knowledge bridges our worlds." He paused, studying her reaction. "She may offer guidance for the path ahead." "A white woman," Eliza repeated, startled by this unexpected revelation. "She lives freely among your band?" "As freely as any," he confirmed. "She is called White Deer Woman now. She has married, borne children. Few remember she was not born Lakota." A rare smile touched his lips. "The boundaries between worlds are more permeable than most believe." The information shifted something fundamental in Eliza's understanding. Not just abstract possibility, but living proof that the path she contemplated, however uncertain, had been walked before. That someone had not only survived the journey between worlds, but had flourished there. As they mounted for the night's ride, Eliza found herself positioned between worlds once again, Akacheta and Chayton leading, James riding behind, the vast wilderness stretching around them in all directions. The ghost town Crossroads, where her journey began, seemed a lifetime ago rather than mere weeks. They rode beneath a sky ablaze with stars, following ancient trails known only to the Lakota. The rhythm of hoofbeats became meditative, allowing Eliza's mind to settle into a state of unusual clarity. Each breath of frigid air seemed to scour away another layer of the person she had been, revealing someone newer, stronger, more truly herself beneath. She thought of Blackwood, sacrificing himself for people he barely knew. Of Father Michael, building his cabin between worlds. Of the mysterious White Deer Woman who had transformed captivity into chosen belonging. Of James, defying his father for principle. Of Akacheta, walking the warrior's path and the healer's path simultaneously. All of them had stood at crossroads. All had made choices that defied the expectations of their origins. In their stories, Eliza began to glimpse the outlines of her own. Dawn found them crossing a broad plain, the horizon ahead revealing the first hazy shapes of mountain foothills. Somewhere beyond lay the Lakota winter camp, and with it possibilities Eliza had never imagined when she first joined the wagon train's westward journey. "Are you afraid?" James asked quietly, guiding his horse alongside hers as they paused. Briefly to rest the animals, Eliza considered the question seriously. "Not afraid," she decided finally, "but aware of standing at another crossroads, perhaps the most important one yet." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "When my father abandoned you, he thought he was delivering judgment. Instead, he delivered opportunity." He glanced ahead to where Akacheta and Chayton conferred over their route. Not the opportunity any of us would have chosen, but powerful nonetheless. "To see with different eyes," Eliza murmured, remembering Akacheta's words about her mismatched gaze. "To see what others cannot," James agreed. "Barriers where there might be bridges, enemies where there might be allies." He hesitated, then added softly, "Endings where there might be beginnings." As they resumed their journey, Eliza felt a strange peace settle over her despite the dangers still pursuing them. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with challenges. She could only dimly foresee. The winter camp might offer shelter or suspicion. The pursuing war party might find their trail or lose it entirely. The future held no guarantees, but she rode forward with clear purpose, no longer abandoned but chosen, no longer judged but valued. The ghost town Crossroads had not been her ending after all, but rather the beginning of a journey between worlds, a journey that continued with each hoofbeat, carrying her further from what had been and closer to what might yet be. The mismatched eyes that had marked her as cursed among her own people had been recognized as a gift by another. The abandonment meant to be her destruction had become the catalyst for her transformation, and the Lakota warrior who had found her dying in the snow had become not just her rescuer, but her guide to possibilities that existed in the spaces between worlds, possibilities as vast and unexplored as the frontier itself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.